Welcome to the Story Learning Podcast, regular doses of language learning tips and motivation to help you become fluent in any language. With me, Olly Richards. For language programs, books, free resources, and much more, visit StoryLearning.com.
Good morning, everybody. Welcome back to the I Will Teach You a Language podcast. You're learning a foreign language? Well, welcome. This is hopefully the last and only podcast you'll ever need to find out how to go about doing it better, smarter, faster. I have over 15 years of experience learning and teaching languages, and I try to package all of that up and deliver it to you for your listening and learning pleasure in bite-sized episodes of around 15 minutes, although they are very rarely 15 minutes. They're either more like, 45 minutes or something like that. At least recently they have been. So whether you've got 15 or 45 minutes to spare to listen to podcasts on your commute, either way, you should hit subscribe to make sure you don't miss an episode. And also, if you've got friends who are learning languages, send them a quick text or WhatsApp messages or whatever the kid, Instagram messages, whatever the kids use these days. Send them a message. Say, hey, go and check out the I Will Teach You a Language podcast. They will thank you for it, hopefully. All right. I have been having tons and tons of fun with Italian. This partly explains why I haven't been releasing episodes as regularly for the last couple of weeks. I've been very busy focusing on Italian, and I don't think I'm going to talk about Italian that much on the podcast because I'm covering it a lot on the YouTube videos. And to be honest with you, with actually learning the language and then having to put videos together and blog posts every week, it's enough. I think it's a lot of work. So if you do want to follow along with this project and see all these cool videos I'm making all around London, make sure to go over to YouTube and subscribe to my channel to search for I Will Teach You a Language. I've also created some very useful pages on the blog, which are all about this Italian project. I've got all the videos and updates in one place, all the blog posts, every resource that I've been using. I'm also putting that in these pages so that it's like a big directory of everything. So I'll put the link to that in the show notes, which will be at iwillteachyoualanguage.com/episode 268. So if you are learning Italian, you'll definitely want to bookmark that. What else? So much I don't even know where to start. September the 25th, I believe, although don't quote me on that. There's a great event in London called the Language Masters event, and it's a celebration of Michel Thomas and his life. And we are doing an event at the offices of Teach Yourself in central London. It'll be a great event. It'll be me, Lindsay Williams, Richard Simcott, and Alex Rawlings. So it'll be a panel discussion on how languages should be learned in the 21st century. And if you'd like to come along to that, then you can go to my website, go to iwillteachyoualanguage.com, and you can scroll down to the bottom, and there's a little section there called Meet Olly. And then if you go there, you'll find out, I've got a link to tickets. They're really cheap. It's like £10. So where you can come. There will also be something very special happening at that event, related to that same thing that I've been teasing you with for years now, saying I can't tell you about it, but I will be able to tell you about it at that event. It's when it's all going to be released. So if you're in London, please come down. It'd be great to see you. And yeah, you'll find out what all this secrecy is all about. Anyway, let's hear today's question from Ron.
Hey, Olly, my name's Ron in the US. I'm learning Spanish, and I was curious if you had any tips on memorizing conjugation, not just of different verbs, but like when you start getting into past tense, future tense, things like that with various languages. Do you just take the time to memorize the conjugations and then practice with a speaker on italki, or what's the best way to go about doing that? Thanks so much.
Hey, Ron, thank you very much for your question. It's a nice, concise question as well, which is great. Verb conjugations. Right then, so many languages, especially Romance languages, have verb conjugations. English doesn't so much. It's pretty easy. In English, you just say I am. Well, actually, I am. That's a different case. I go, you go, he goes. I went, you went, he went. It's pretty easy in English. But in Spanish and other languages, it can be a little bit tricky because the verbs always conjugate. Yo voy, tú vas, él va. Yo iba, tú ibas, and so on. And so the question is, well, how do you go about memorizing these? Because one thing is actually memorizing the conjugations of these verbs, different verbs that conjugate in different ways depending on the ending of the verb. But then when the tense changes and you put it in the subjunctive or the different past tenses, they all change as well. So it is, it's a serious feature a serious grammatical feature of lots of different languages, and as such, there's no quick fix or silver bullet. So I'm going to answer this question in a few different ways. I'm going to tell you what I think the kind of overriding principles are. I'll tell you what I did when I first started learning languages, and I'll also tell you about what I'm doing now with my Italian, because I think, Ron, this might be the most interesting part for you, actually, because you're going to get to see me doing it as I'm making these YouTube videos about it. So, back in the day, I mean, let's think, 1999, I was first learning French, and I was sitting in my bedroom in North London, spending most of my time with my grammar textbooks. I used to buy these grammar practice books. So like you just have pages and pages of tests on different elements of grammar. And I used to just go through those, trying to wrap my head around it. And I remember also I would often like copy out complete verb tables over and over again from memory until I got them right. So I used to do a lot of that because I didn't know any better. And then later on, I went to France, and then through a process of speaking a lot, that stuff starts to become normal and natural. And the thing about verb conjugations is that you don't need all of them. In fact, what you'll probably find is in daily life, most of the time you're only using the first, second, and third person singular. I, you, he, she. You're going to be using that far more than, for example, they. And you're going to be using certain verbs more than others, and you're going to be, so basically, I still find even these days, right, there are some times when I come to conjugate a Spanish verb, for example, which might be in the vosotros form in the simple past of an unusual verb, and I'm not quite sure how it works. So it is like an ongoing process of kind of knowing how to conjugate all the important verbs in different tenses and then not quite being clear about others. And that's totally fine, because once you've got the basics down, then the communication is kind of taken care of. So that's what I did with my first few languages. I think I kind of went through, I did these grammar. I learned the grammar, basically, and I'd copy out verb tables, I'd do the exercises. But then when the time when I really learned it, when it became automatic and and accurate, was after a long period of speaking. Because when you speak, you get feedback, right? You realize whether people have understood what you say. You also get to hear other people saying these, using these conjugations, and you just increase your confidence across the board. A lot of this is about confidence, So when you spend a lot of time with, say, Spanish speakers and you hear them saying these verbs over and over again, you just know instinctively that it's right. And then what happens over a period of time is that your just general understanding of the language gets so good that you just know instinctively whether something sounds right or not. It's like the subjunctive is a classic example. I remember in French, je veux que tu fasses is I want you to do something. In French, right? And that's the subjunctive, and it's not something we were ever taught in school. But I remember that quite clearly, because it sticks out like a sore thumb, and you just get used to hearing it, right? And so that was basically the process. So that's what I did when I first started. Now, what I'm doing in Italian now is a bit different, and I don't know exactly how it's going to work out, so I can't tell you this is definitely the right way. But in my first month of learning Italian right now, Ron, which is very much the same as very, very, very similar to Spanish, right? It's not the same. That's not right, but it's very similar to Spanish in the way it functions, which in many ways actually is a disadvantage for me, because the risk is that I just kind of transmit my Spanish onto my Italian and end up speaking sort of pseudo Italian Spanish, which is not what I want to do. In the first month, I'm getting a lot of input. And I am specifically not looking up grammar rules for the most part. Certainly not verb conjugations. A few things I had to look up, like how pronouns work in Italian, because there are a lot more than in Spanish. Also articles. Pronoun. There's a lot of stuff that's different. But basically, I'm not looking up grammar rules. I'm just doing a lot of reading and listening. And the idea behind this is that over the course of the month, I'm going to be able to learn a lot of this stuff naturally without the need to look it up in rule books. And I'm already finding that a lot of verbs and verb conjugations in different tenses are starting to sink in already. When I think about how to conjugate certain verbs in the imperfect or in the future, or even in the subjunctive, it's already gone into my brain in a fairly natural way. certainly to the extent that I understand how these conjugations are working. And when I hear it, I know what it means. But it's going to be a very different matter when at the 1 month mark, I start speaking. So I'm not doing any speaking until the first month. And I'm going to record my first few conversations after that 1 month point. So after 1 month of massive input, I'm going to record my first few conversations so you can kind of see exactly what happens at that moment, which is going to be very, very interesting. But I do already pretty much know what's going to happen in terms of verbs and verb conjugations, which is that I'm going to struggle. Because there is a difference between being able to understand something and being able to say it. And I'm sure you can relate to this, Ron. You probably understand a lot of verbs when you hear them in Spanish. You can probably recognize them, but it's when it comes to speaking that you just get confused, right? It takes too long to think through those verb tables in your mind. So my approach to this is going to be as follows. First of all, I'm going to make sure I keep up with my listening and reading big time, because I know that mastering all these different grammatical elements of a language is basically a consequence of exposure to them. Right, so the only way I'm going to get to master verb conjugations in Italian is by having a lot of exposure to it. That's the kind of big picture thing, right? So I'm going to make sure I keep that up. But also, I know that when I come to speak, I'm going to make all kinds of mistakes with verb conjugations. And there's going to be a lot of stuff that I don't know how to say as well. I'm not going to know how to conjugate certain verbs in the past tense and stuff like that. So I think most likely what I'm going to do is, over a period of a couple of weeks, start to use one of these grammar practice books and just do a lot of drilling and testing, because that's what's going to just make me aware of things. You know, sometimes when you see stuff explained to you and you see it on a piece of paper like that is enough to make it click. Often it's not the case, but I think you have to go through a phase of looking at and practicing these rules. So just to kind of bring it into your conscious mind. So I think I will do a little bit of that. I'm not looking forward to it particularly, but I think it's necessary. And also I'll be making sure that I get corrected on that stuff as well from my tutors, so that I know if I'm making those mistakes. And then a combination of actually starting to speak regularly. So I have to start producing, and I'm going to be speaking every day. I'm going to have sessions speaking every day of some kind, whether it's a lesson or a language exchange or something, because I know that when you start to speak regularly, that's when you start to sort this stuff out in your mind. Right. So I know that's going to be the point where this starts to come together. So a combination of actually speaking a lot, keeping up the listening, and also doing some targeted study of these conjugations is what I'm going to aim for. And then as well, longer term, the other thing is going to be just to start to go out and live an Italian life as much as I can, you know, actually go out and make friends and hang out with people and have conversations. Because in all my other languages, like, that's how I ended up really dominating verb conjugations. It wasn't through the study. Like, the study helps to kind of put it on the map for you, so you know more or less how certain verbs inflect and write themselves out in these different languages. But that's only like priming your brain. It's really once you actually go out and start using these verbs, like talking with people, that the small number of really useful verbs and conjugations that you really need and will need on a daily basis, that's when they really bed down. And then so as soon as you've got that and you're confident with those, then the other verbs and the other conjugations will come naturally over time, as long as you keep listening, as long as you keep speaking with people. So that's the way I see it. So I've talked about what I used to do when I first started language. I've talked about what I'm doing now with my Italian projects. And again, make sure you're subscribed to the YouTube channel if you want to actually see because I'm sure I'm going to be talking about that when the speaking starts, right? So then the third thing is kind of big picture thoughts and principles. And I've covered some of these already in what I've said. But in general, I think that the golden rule must be that you're getting lots and lots of exposure to Spanish. So that means a lot of listening and reading. The trouble with listening is that sometimes this stuff passes you by. Like, you can understand a lot of what you're saying, a lot of what you're hearing, without necessarily being conscious of the detail. So what I've been finding with Italian is that reading is what actually really helps you focus on detail, for obvious reasons. You know, you can see it there on the page. So I would focus on getting a lot of reading and regular reading every day in Spanish, so you can see these verb conjugations on the page in action. So lots of input. Secondly, you've got to be doing lots of speaking. because that's how you'll start to sort this stuff out in your brain, and the interaction with people will help you figure out that helps to activate all this stuff in your brain, right? And the third thing is some of what's known as a focus on form. So some deliberate attention to the rules of the conjugations is also going to be helpful. And I think some deliberate practice and drills would also be helpful in the early stages, just to kind of get that into your brain and starting to kind of just hardwire that into your understanding of the language. But as you'll probably be garnering from my response here, I see it mostly as a holistic thing. And I think where most people will fail is because they're simply not getting enough exposure. You know, someone left a comment on one of these YouTube videos that I'm making about Italian the other day and said, wow, because I'm doing about 3 hours a day of listening. And someone said, wow, that's a hell of a lot. I'm only getting 15 minutes a day, and I thought that was enough. And of course, 15 minutes a day is better than nothing. And if you do 15 minutes a day over time, that adds up, right? But really, if you're looking to dominate a language, you need to get more into your brain than that. 15 minutes over a 24-hour period is not going to break the back of the language. So you need to really make a conscious decision to up the amount of input that you're getting. And that's what's going to help you dominate these verb conjugations over time. So I hope that was helpful, Ron. It's a great question. And let me know if that answer was helpful. You can find the show notes at iwillteachyoualanguage.com/episode 268. If anyone else out there listening has any specific tips, or you think I haven't maybe dealt with it in enough depth or detail, or I'm missing something, please come and leave a comment on the show notes page as well, because it's always really, really useful to hear from everybody else. Now, at the end of every episode, I like to leave you the resource of some kind on the topic of the show. And for so many different reasons, it is this Italian project at the moment that I'm putting all my energy into, and I would like you to be following along. So please go over to iwillteachyoualanguage.com/episode 268, which is the show notes for this podcast, and look at the links to all the various parts of the project, where I'm listing my resources, where I've got the YouTube channel, all of that stuff, and come and follow along. You can do so by email or by notifications on YouTube. I from my side, I'm really putting so much effort into this project that I don't want it to be wasted. So the more of you guys who come and follow along and can lend me your support for the duration of the project, the better. That will all be helpful to me. All right, then. Thanks for listening. See you back in the next episode.
Thanks for listening to today's episode. And here at Story Learning, everything that I do is powered by stories, whether that's writing books, teaching lessons, crafting courses. My mission is to help everyone succeed at learning a new language through the power of story. And we now have comprehensive language courses in over 15 languages, from Spanish to French, Korean to Japanese, and across all levels from beginner to mastery. And you can take a 7-day free trial of any of these programs by visiting storylearning.com/courses. I've poured my heart and soul into creating these courses over the last 10 or so years, and we've helped tens of thousands of new students achieve their dreams of learning a new language, all through the power of story. So go ahead and take a free trial. There's no commitment. You can try out our method for free, see if this can also be the breakthrough for you that it's been for so many other people. storylearning.com/courses.